Hi there, it is Jo from Minerva, and today I'm here with a different kind of video, one where I hope that we can exchange ideas in comments. I'm looking for how you sew efficiently and some tips that you use for making sure that you get the most out of your sewing time. You might want to think of your sewing time a little bit differently if you're not getting round to sewing, or you're not being as efficient as you like. And there might be lots of reasons for that. You might be busy, you might be trying to fit your hobby around your job, you might not have a designated sewing space, you might not have a very big space to work in, or you might want to really tackle a big project and think about how you can break it down into smaller pieces so it becomes achievable. I know I'm really lucky. I work in a designated sewing space, so I can hop in for sewing and hop out again without having to clear away, and that's a big part of getting some sewing time. But with a few tips, you can maybe think of your patterns and your projects in small chunks so you can get the most of your time. My first tip is to maybe think about your mindset in terms of your sewing hobby. So do you like to have a really big chunk of time, like a whole day? And if that's not possible, how are you going to change your mindset so that you can feel like you can be achievable and make something possible in shorter periods of time? If you've got an idea about that, pop that in the comments below. We'd love to hear about it. Because I can leave my machine out, I like to think about my pattern in chapters. So I think about everything I can do without the machine, everything I can do with the machine, and everything I can hand finish in front of the television. This is a really useful strategy if you're trying to make something big like a coat or a collared shirt or something that you've not tackled before, because then you can maybe walk away from each part of the pattern and have a fresh start when you come back to it. I like to think of it a little bit like cooking a Christmas dinner. Some things you can prepare and put them in the freezer ready, and they can stay there, and you're still trying to aim and get to that outcome at the end where everyone has a great end product. My second tip is to maybe have a plan of what you're going to sew, because if you start going into your cupboard to get things out to sew and you don't know what it's going to be, and that's your sewing time, then that might be taken up by choosing, procrastinating, reorganizing, decluttering, sorting, and not quite choosing. So make sure that before you allocate your sewing time, that might be 30 minutes, it might be an hour, it might be a whole morning, lucky you, then you need to think about what you're going to do when you've got that slot of time. I like to plan my projects. Some people like to do a grid where they plan out what they're going to make for the year maybe, and then they can make sure that they've got all the correct notions and materials. Some people like to make one thing at a time, so they know that they haven't got much space, so they can make sure that they cut out one thing, they make sure that that's all cleared away, and then they haven't got to store half a bag of something that's not quite finished. I'd be interested to know how you plan your projects. You can also use the project planner that comes in Minerva's delivery bags. They're quite useful too, so you can definitely allocate a fabric to a pattern so that you know exactly what you're going to do in your sewing time. There are a few ways that you can plan. You might use a sewing journal. I've got a sewing journal here where I can put notes in and maybe revisit a pattern that I've seen before, so that's always quite an efficient make. I've got a little hanging card that I use, and in here are what I'm going to do now, what I'm going to do next, what I'm going to do soon, and what I might do. I actually keep my Minerva fabric tags in there so that when I want to upload my project onto the Minerva website to share with makers, I can tag the product so that everyone can see which products that I've used. Number 3, once you're past your choosing stage or your planning stage, then you need to maybe think about chopping your project down into chunks. So the first one is a cutting out sort of session. So I'm going to think of my video today in chunks of half an hour. So I think, what can I achieve in half an hour? I might even set a timer so that I really can make sure that I give myself that half an hour that's uninterrupted. And I'm going to think, what can I do in half an hour? And I'm also going to think, how can I be really efficient in that half an hour? In number 3 tip, I'm thinking about preparing as much as I can without even getting the sewing machine out, especially if you have to get your machine out and set it up on a table somewhere. Then that takes time, and maybe you'll get all of that out and then you won't even get to the sewing stage anyway. So the first part is to do cutting and putting all of your products together. I absolutely love to batch cut out. It stems from when I didn't have a designated sewing space, and we had one dining room table and small children, and the table was never empty enough for me to lay fabric out on it. So when it was empty, I would cut lots and lots and lots and lots of things out all in one go. And then I would know that I wasn't nagging everybody to clear the table, so that I could just cut out one thing at a time. From this, I started to put my pieces into a bag. So I've got 3 projects cut out at the moment. I have the Jarly vest. So this is a stretch velvet vest, like an underlayer. I've got a Charlie caftan in a Rico light cotton, and I've got Burda 6442, which I'm going to sew with you today, showing you a few little shortcuts. This is the same velvet as this, because while I was cutting out, I cut out the dress first, and then I had some leftovers, and I thought, okay, well, I could fold all these leftovers up and put them away, or I could straight away now choose a pattern to use up the leftovers, and it can stay in there. It can stay in there for a whole year, but at least I know that that little leftover of fabric has been allocated to something, so I won't have to be spending more time thinking about it again. You might choose to do this with little freezer bags. You might choose to do this in a curver box. You might choose to put them in a shoe box. You might fold things up and just put them in a neat little pile where you're going to sew next time. I really like these bags because I can see inside. I normally put the thread and the zip and anything else that I need inside. And if you're really short on sewing space, then you can hang them on a coat hanger in your wardrobe. So my top tip is to batch cut. Whether you're batch cutting or just cutting one item, because that's your focus and that's what you're going to work on in your sewing time, it's really important to put on the notches. There's lots of time wasted where you think, I'll do the notches later, and you take the paper pieces off and you fold them all up, and then you start sewing and it says sew between the notches, and then you have to get all the paper out again. So while you've got the paper on the fabric, make the most of it. Take all of the notches, all of the tailor's tacks, dots, even if you don't understand what they are, just mark them all, because somewhere in the instructions that little reference will pop up. Of course, if you've read the instructions before, you'll know what some of those things are, but never just dismiss something because it's probably there for a reason. I'd be interested to know, do you keep your paper pieces on your fabric, or do you take them off? Do you store them with the paper on, or do you take them off and mark with chalk? That would be interesting for me to know too. I'll still to try and do as much as I can without getting the sewing machine out, so that when I do get the sewing machine out, I'm maximising my time getting it out, plugging it in, getting under the table and all of those kind of things. So while my fabric is cut out and I'm thinking about putting it into the bag or the pile or wherever I'm going to store it, I'll interface all of the pieces that I want interfacing. I can check out some other things. I might be able to, if I've got the ironing board out, I might be able to press up the hem if I know the hem allowance, or I know already how long it's going to be. I might make sure that I put all tailor's tacks in for buttons. All of those things that you can do without a machine can be done in a little half-an-hour slot. Maybe you could squeeze it in with your cutting if you didn't quite manage to finish cutting out and doing all of the markings. You can do that in your next 30-minute slot. There are lots of things that you can do on your pattern in the last few minutes of your 30 minutes. Sometimes I pin the darts, because I always know in a pattern the first thing it will say is mark and pin the darts, so I do that straight away. I might even fold it up, put it away, and it won't get sewn until my next sewing session, but straight away I can take it out, sew the darts. In this part, this is the sort of middle 30 minutes, or one of your middle 30 minutes. You can do some tacking, you can do some pinning, you can have another read of the instructions, you can check that you've got everything on the list that you need to finish your project. And at this stage, I probably won't have even got the machine out. Other things you can do before you even get your sewing machine out is to press up your hems. So this is the sleeve hem. So although I can't hem that yet because it needs to be in its full circle, I can press it up, open out the seam, pin it together and sew it, and then when I'm ready to turn it up, there's a crease line there, and that will mean it will be so much easier for that to just flip back using the seam allowance on the pattern. The only time this might not be so useful is if you're not sure of the length, so you'll be
deviating from the hem allowance on the pattern. But if you've made the pattern before, you like the hem, press up the hems before you sew, and then they just flip up, and it saves you having to try and wiggle that round and press it up. Try and get a small circumference around a sleeve board to press it. If you press it flat, it's much easier to do. In fact, lots of things are easier to do if you do them flat rather than in a circle. So that's another speedy tip. You can hem up your hem allowances with a press.
You can also switch up the order of your pattern so that you do things while you've got them out on the table.
Now it's pressed, you can flick it up and sew it in place. Lots of pattern instructions. Put the main parts together, and then at the end they say to go around and hem everything. Well, I like to think while I'm on this bit, I'll get it hemmed, and then I won't have hemming left to do at the end. I was using the overlocker to sew the seams, so while I've got the overlocker out, I've overlocked around the edges, and now that is ready to hem, and the sleeves would be complete then, rather than going back to the body, back to another piece, back to another piece. Sometimes I like to do that before I put the skirt bit on the bottom of a dress, because it's easier to just have half the weight of the fabric, just the top half of the garment, if I'm finishing off particular pieces of the garment. So you don't always have to follow the instructions in the order they're in. You can start to group together things to do with each part of the item. So all of the sleeve bits, once I've sewn that, will be complete.
Depending on how you like to work, in one of these middle sort of preparation sessions, you might want to overlock your pieces. If you use an overlocker to finish your raw edges, then you can overlock each piece all the way around. It's quite therapeutic. And then put it back in the bag for another day of construction. I don't often do that. I do sometimes if I've got a fabric that is really fraying and I know that if it's in a bag and it's going to get moved around, it'll start to sort of move the weave a little bit. So sometimes I sew all the way around with the overlocker, and sometimes I just fold it up ready for a sewing day. If you're going to use self-covering buttons, now's the time you could prepare those and put them in the bag. You could do really minuscule tasks like press your zip while you've got the iron on. All of those things will make your project much more efficient because you won't be repeating your physical actions. The last thing I like to do in this sort of medium part of my project is to load a couple of bobbins. We've all been there. We all have been sewing away and there's no bobbin in the bottom. So I want to load up 2 bobbins and put that in the bag too, so that the day I get my sewing machine out, I can just sew and sew and sew and sew, and I won't have to keep stopping and looking for things and finding extra products. I'm going to sew up Burda 6442. One of the good efficient things for doing a quick sew is something that you've made before, so you already know it fits. So this is Burda 6442. This is this view, the daytime view. I'm going to make this evening view next. I made this daytime view just to check the fitting of the bust and the waist and how to make the twist tie. So I know this fits, so I know it's definitely going to be a really quick, efficient sew because I've already made a wearable toile. I chose a fabric that I knew I would like to wear, and I knew that if I had to do something here, like maybe put a little stitching because it was a too deep V, or change the length, I could do that and it would still be wearable. Now I can make my evening dress. This fabric is called Falling Blossoms. It's Minerva's viscose jersey, and it's ideal for a day dress, a sort of office dress. It's really comfortable for sitting down in. If you sit at a computer and work, it's so comfortable, but it looks so elegant. It's sort of a calf length, but you can definitely change the length, and you can definitely change the length of the sleeves. Number 4 is to maybe get your machine out. So that's what I'm going to do now. I've got my Burda 6442. It's cut out, all the notches are done. I can't even remember what I've pinned because I sort of ran out of my 30 minutes and I stopped. So let's have a look in the bag. I'm going to get the machine out and we can take a look at some quick sewing. Another thing that I do that keeps me working efficiently is I have all my very regular tools in a little box right by me. It can be a little shoe box or a recycled box, a plastic box, an ice cream tub, something like that, so that anything that I need quick to hand, I can just get out of the box without sort of getting up and looking all the time. So I've got a seam gauge, a bone folder for pressing seams,
my roller for marking, a large unpicker, a small unpicker, hand needles. I love this tool. It's my marking chalk pencil, a little bit of sticky glue, pen marker for stretch fabrics, screwdriver for if I need to change the foot, tweezers for handling under the machine, thimble for hand sewing, my small scissors, a tape measure, and little tools that I need to use my machine efficiently. So this is for my overlocker to change the needles, and this is to remove my foot plate if anything goes wrong. So everything is in there. I can rattle around in there and find it, but I know I haven't got to get up and go and look for it and have things that are lost and work really inefficiently. So that's by my machine. I also like to use a pin magnet because I can take them off there, work with them, throw them back on there, and I do like to sort my pins back into the correct tins afterwards for using different fabrics. So those are my sort of key tools for making sure that I can work efficiently. The machine's all threaded up and I'm ready to look at what stage did I put everything in the bag. Here are the instructions. I'm going to keep those on a board so they're not flapping around. I can just keep concentrating on the bit that I need and keep folding the instructions around. I used to at my old house have a corkboard on the wall, and that was great because I used to have that piece of paper not flapping around on my table but stuck to the wall. But here I've got it on a clipboard so I can make sure it doesn't fall on the floor or get in the way. Okay, so where was I up to? I'm wondering now because I cut this out a long time ago. I've taken the paper pieces off, but I've marked it F for front. I've done some pinning already, so that must have been in my last half an hour. Front facing for an armhole, B for back, and I've pinned that ready. I've got a line here showing the nap of the velvet, so I'm giving myself lots of information, and I've pinned that. I've got a tailor's tack there, so I must have done that in one of my intermediate sewing sessions where I didn't have the machine out, but I tried to prepare as much as possible. So actually my 30 minutes sewing today is going to be pretty efficient. I've marked some darts. Look, these are the back darts. I've marked them with tailor's tacks at the ends and in the middle, and I've pinned them. So we can get sewing straight away. So in my first half an hour of sewing, I'm going to join up the centre seam and make the twist front detail. I'm using my sewing machine and overlocker together today, so I'm switching in one and out another. That's great if you can have that on your table, but if you need to get it out separately, then you might want to think about doing all of your overlocking pieces that you can do without sewing seams and all of your sewing pieces so that you don't have to keep switching in and out. Having a clean work surface really helps for quick and efficient sewing. I've just got the box with my tools and my instructions and lots of space to work with my fabric so that I'm not knocking things on the floor and making a mess. I don't use a lot of sewing space, I just have one table. In this first 30-minute session, I'm hoping to get the twist front detail together and work on the darts on the back. So I've done the upper body pieces, hopefully, by the end of my first 30-minute sewing session. One thing I like to do is when I pull the threads is keep them open, and then it makes it really nice and quick and easy to tie off the ends of my darts. If I'm understitching, I normally don't pin, I just use my fingers to feel if the fabric is pointing in the right direction, and that also speeds up my sewing time. I know that I want to overlock these shoulders, but I'm not going to get time to do that today, so I'm going to wait until I next have my overlocker out to whiz across those shoulder seams. So for now, I'm just going to sew them with the sewing machine.
Okay, I've done my half an hour sewing. Time's up now for me to finish, but I've got the twist detail in. I've joined the shoulders, I've got the back facing, and my back darts are done. I could have whizzed down the sides, but that's when I might have made a mistake. So it's good when your half an hour's up to clear away, and then you've got something to go straight back to next time. I'm going to put everything back in that bag. So I can crack on with that in my next half an hour sew. This is my second 30-minute slot. So straight away I knew that I was going to those side seams, and I'm hoping to put the armhole facings on today and see how I get on and see how long that takes me. I think it's probably going to take me about half an hour to finish putting the bodice together. The good thing about sewing in half an hour chunks is you can make improvements in your next half an hour, and this time I'm going to use my walking foot. I found that when I was sewing in the first half an hour I was getting a bit of creeping with my velvet, so I think I can be more efficient and more accurate if I have my walking foot on. That's a good thing about sewing in small chunks. You've got a little bit of time to reflect in between each session so that you can improve. To be a little bit more efficient, I'm going to sew my facings straight on the overlocker, but I need to be mindful that I'm using the correct seam allowance, so I need to make sure that I'm cutting off the excess and that my seam line is running in the correct place. I could do some chaining here where you don't cut off the threads in between, but I was just happily whizzing through. I'm also going to finish around the edge of the armhole while I've got the overlocker out. I don't want to put one in and then have to finish it afterwards. Marking your fabric with a chalk so that you know which is the front and back is quite important so that you don't make mistakes while you're sewing through your project. I knew which side was the front and back, so my armholes are going straight in. I'm going to pin both and then sew both. It's better than pinning and sewing because you keep having to switch position and it's not quite as speedy. I've got my armholes in. There's a little bit of hand finishing to do, but I'm going to save that till the end where I sew the facings down and sew my thread ends in and everything.
I'm going to think about my next half an hour where I'm going to think about putting this skirt on. This is my third half an hour sew to put the dress together. I've decided to put the skirt pieces together by chaining and putting it straight through the overlocker, and you can see that that excess fabric seam allowance is being cut off. It's super quick, especially when it's just really straight seams and you know that you've got everything marked up and it's correct. Don't be fooled by the speed of the video. There are obviously times when you slow down, when you're cutting off your thread ends, when you don't want to make a mistake and clip your fabric. I also want to make sure that when I'm sewing everything in the correct position. So I might just add some marks back in again that have rubbed off so that I know where to stop and start. On this skirt, I've got some V shapes, so I want to make sure that they lie nice and flat on the skirt part of the dress.
Number 5 is any hand finishing. So once the machine's gone away and we've finished as much as we can finish, then I don't sew in here all of the time. I might just sit in the evening and maybe sew in front of the TV. I might sew outside in the summer if I need a really good light. But all of those last hand finishing things, I won't be trying to rush those at the end. If you sew in one whole day, by the time you get to the end of the day and you're tired and you're really, really wanting to finish your project, then sometimes that's not the best time to do hand finishing. So I like to choose another little slot, a 30-minute slot somewhere else where I finish off everything by hand, so I can sew the buttons on, I can put a hook and eye at the top of the zip, I might sew my facings down. I do all those little hand finishing things in the last 30 minutes. In the case of finishing this one that I've been making, I tried it on and my facings weren't really behaving themselves, and that's because it's crushed velvet. It's shiny on the inside and they kept flipping out. So I've top stitched around the arm. I have spent some hand stitching time just sewing down the facings. That was the first thing I tried to keep the facings in at the top and the bottom. When I tried it on, I then tested for length. I tried turning it up and pinning it and trying it on, and it felt quite weighty on the bottom. It actually hung really, really nicely with just a narrow overlocked edge. On this pattern, I have a join here, which you wouldn't normally have when you make the long evening version, but because of my fabric requirements, I cut my skirt and my top separately. Other things you might do at the hand finishing stage, you might add a label too. The very last thing I like to do is to take a photo of my item, and of course that's what we would love you to do. So if you have something that you've made and you would like to share that with our Minerva makers, then do make a free account with us, share your makes over at Minerva, and you'll get a lot of sewing inspiration from our sewing community. You can also join the craft club there, where you will receive discounts and offers throughout the year. Thank you very much for watching. Do call back again for more there's learn to sew videos, sew-alongs, full sew-alongs where people show you how to make something from start to finish. There's lots of pattern and fabric inspiration from Vicky, and this one today where I'm asking you to join in the conversation about how you sew efficiently and how you get your sewing time. Do call again soon.
Bye.